Hey everybody, this is Sean, Dollar Store Dynasty, and this is No Stopping. I just want to talk, I'm no longer in China, back in the United States in my home here, and I want to talk a little bit about my experiences leaving China and what that was like. Here's how it went. So back in April, I got a message from one of my supervisors or employers that they were going to force majeure my contract, and at that point, basically, it was just kind of sitting around in China and waiting for something to happen. At that point, they were anticipating school starting at the end of May, but it was in a very sort of low, minimal capacity. So anyway, I got a message. They said they were going to, they apologized and said they were going to basically cancel the program that I was a part of. And I understood that, but I was a little bit, I was still a little bit frustrated that they hadn't, done so sooner when I had suggested to sort of force majeure the contract, rather than giving me assurances that they couldn't themselves sort of guarantee, and so and it would have been a lot easier at that point to sort of to leave China. There weren't as many restrictions in place. A little bit of a coup. But so I got the message, and they didn't really indicate that I had to leave the apartment by a certain time. Like I had just renewed my visa at that point, so basically my visa permitted me to stay in China at least till September. And so there was an opportunity to kind of look for more work in China if I chose to do so. And they hadn't given me any sort of indication that they expected me to leave the apartment by a certain date, but they did sort of put that out there in their wording. They did suggest that they expected me to be leaving soon, which was quite unreasonable, considering the circumstances, to the point that they waited for me to inform me that they were going to force majeure my contract. It was much more difficult to leave China at that point. They were going to pay me my final salary, my final month's salary, and they were going to pay me my airline compensation. But really, according to my contract, I most definitely could arbitrate for more. It was definitely there. It was an act of their the breach in the contract was really their liability. But anyway, I took their information. I did do a little bit of looking for work in China at that point, but I was not getting in, and I was, considering that I was in China at that point, much easier for me to go from one job to another than bringing somebody in, because they weren't allowing foreign nationals into China at that point. So I kind of felt I was going to explore, just see what was out there. Certainly would be, hazard pay and those kinds of compensations would all be sort of legitimate at that point. But all I could find was really situations where people were waiting till September, or waiting to, we're going to wait till that advantage wasn't mine anymore. And basically, that's all they were kind of coming back with, like, well, we don't want to give you an advantage, so we're going to wait, which would mean I would just kind of be living off my my current visa, and I didn't foresee that sort of being. I think that would have worsened as I went, because at some point my employer might have came to me and said, "Hey, no, you can't stay here anymore," and then, well, what are you going to do? You don't have a contract lined up, or you don't have a lease, you don't have a sponsor lined up. So I chose to leave, and I went looking for a flight. It was my understanding at that point that American Airlines were still allowed one flight in and out of China. I went on the United Airlines reservation site, or the website, and I found a flight there. Well, that was indicated as that one flight that was allowed, permitted. And so I booked that. It was available, and so I booked that itinerary for May 17th, I think it was. And that flight required, it was from Shanghai to Jacksonville. That required, a number of layovers. You had one layover, the first one being from Shanghai to Tokyo, and then from Tokyo to San Francisco to Houston, Houston to Jacksonville. So I booked that flight, and it was one of the only flights that kind of fell within that range that I was going to be compensated for. Most other flights were considerably more expensive, and that was another aspect of, I felt, was the liability of my employer, because you waited for the flights to be really expensive before you sort of force majeure this contract. It was always, you're also liable for that. But I found that flight, and it was within the compensation, so I booked that flight. And then I had like 3 or 4 weeks just to kind of sit around, and that's all I was doing in China, and it really wasn't really sort of a morale booster or anything like that. It wasn't something I really sort of enjoyed, just not doing anything, not having any sort of purpose or any sort of really sort of assurances, your work is your reliability, and I really didn't have any of that at that point. So I was just kind of sitting around, but I was packing things up, and I was trying to get things out of China. One of the things that happens when you're an ESL teacher is you'll accumulate just sort of like a lot of necessities, living necessities, sheets and towels and pans and forks and spoons and glasses and mugs and so on and so forth. And all that kind of builds up. That's a lot of money you're kind of investing in living overseas, and it's all kind of something you want to be competent. You want to sort of recuperate those expenses as much as you can. So I was in the process of mailing a lot of those items out of China, back to my home here, where my parents were receiving them and putting them in my household. But I was kind of getting a little bit of resistance on both ends, to be honest with you, that people didn't like seeing. First of all, the Chinese people didn't like me seeing and getting all that money out of there. And I think on this end of it, they didn't like it either, because it sort of created more value for it, and really all this just kind of appears like a coup on my ability to sort of advance my status, to be honest with you. All the coincidences, all the occurrences happened like at points where I am, certainly my status was about to be elevated. And even on YouTube, there's a bunch of YouTube bums out there, China bloggers, who are also trying to sort of take advantage of these opportunities. But so I was trying to get stuff out of there, but of course, the Postal Service, they stopped, they ended the services overseas, international services, so I couldn't get anything else. So basically I was left to just getting what I could carry out of there at that point. And I managed everything out, you just kind of dwindle out your freezers and all that, and I got ready to go. Came the day to leave, everything was going smooth, no changes in my itinerary, no notifications, and I turned my key over. There was really nobody sent to do that. It was all kind of myself talking to. I ended up, usually in a lot of contracts they'll send the company's representatives will be there to make sure everything goes smoothly. But in this case, they just said talk to the landlord, basically. So I talked to the landlord, and the old lady. There's a younger guy. It's kind of a family thing, I think, where they had probably from their wedding they had an apartment, and so they had an extra apartment that they were trying to rent out, and probably consolidated the family in one apartment. And so I talked to them, and they said, okay, well, such and such day, and the old lady came over, and she was really excited, which I anticipated, I always kind of, because this is one of the times where I said, all right, I'll just, these people aren't the richest of people, and they have been really generous to me in terms of my contract, and so I will leave a lot of these items here, and basically I left my apartment fully furnished, with a lot of nice things, a lot of nice items that previously I would destroy, because it was my value and I had worked very hard for it, and I wasn't going to, just surrender it, surrender that value without, you know, those items are there to make my life better, you know, and it's like surrendering, making your life better, you know, so someone else can make their life better. And I'd worked very hard for all those items, you know. So usually I would just destroy them rather than see other stuff. But in this case, I said, you know what, these people were pretty nice to me, and you know, they're pretty generous, so I'm going to leave these items here. So I left a very full furnished apartment in my wake, and I could tell for the first time that this, you know, genuine sort of rational, you know, response to that from this older lady. You know, she was happy, she was excited, as was my neighbor, because my neighbor suddenly came over in my apartment and was like, I want this, I want that, I want this, I want that. And you know, that response is the one I would, you know, be more accustomed to, you know, because I'm the same way. You know, if you said, hey, I'm leaving my house, you can have anything in there, you know, I'd be like, wow, you know, you're leaving this? What? I'll take it, you know, printers, all these kinds of things. That had a lot more value in them, you know. They're good for years, you know, but I used them for, you know, a period of maybe a year or less, and now I was forced to sort of give them up. So they were excited, and sometimes, like when I say the more typical response, because sometimes in China they have this very pretentious sort of attitude of like, we don't take secondhand here because that's poor people do that, you know, and they have that sort of arrogance. You do get that, you know, and they will act like they're better than that, you know, even if they're not, even if they're dirt poor and they appear to have common sense and everything else. They have that egoism that says, no, don't show, that's a weakness, don't show anybody that, you know, that you would appreciate secondhand materials, you know. But and I get that a lot too, but at least this old woman, she was receptive to it, and she kind of gave the response that I myself would have, and is probably the most likely amongst rational-minded people, less egocentric people, I guess you would say. And she was all happy, and I checked out. I was in Xinjiang, you know, so I had to fly to Shanghai, and I had booked in a hotel there, the Yonhe Yebo Hotel, and I did a review with them earlier, and it was all nice. So far, so good. And the next morning, my flight was, I check out of the hotel, no problems. I get to the airport, waiting there. I'm actually the first one in line for checkout. Get up to the counter. It's the Japanese leg of the airline, I think Nippon Airways. And he tells me, you can't do this flight. And I'm like, why not? And he says, well, you know, there's restrictions in Tokyo, and when we fly you to Tokyo, you will arrive Sunday evening, and your layover flight is until Monday morning. So what is happening is the Tokyo airport is closing down Sunday evening for cleaning or disinfecting or whatever, you know, because of the COVID. So you can't stay in the hotel, and you can't leave the hotel because foreign nationals can't go into Japan. So you can't make this flight. We can't do the layover for you. And so I said, you know, like, well, what do I do? You know, and they're like, well, we only have one flight to Japan a month, so you can't change that. You're going to have to call United Airlines and see if they can change it. And I'm like, well, United Airlines only has one flight. I don't know what you're talking about. And so I call. I leave the counter, and I'm pretty stressed out about it. I do notice as I'm leaving, there's another American woman. I presume she was American, and she was about my age, blonde-haired woman, and she appears to be going through the same situation that I am. But I leave. I walk out, and the first thing I run into is one of the Chinese airline agents there. Says, do you need a flight to so-and-so? And I said, yes. And she takes me over to a counter immediately. Meanwhile, I'm calling United Airlines on the phone, trying to get them on the phone and talking with this receptionist about air flights. You know, at this point, most of the Chinese airlines had frequent flights going in and out of China to the United States, direct flights. You know, actually, I think they were the only ones who had direct flights going from China to the United States, so you could see what kind of advantageous sort of position that was for them. And so the receptionist was looking for a flight for me in their system, and I finally get United Airlines on the phone, and I'm also talking to them. Now the agents are telling me these prices for the Chinese airlines, and they're they're business class prices, basically, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000. So so I'm looking for information, and I'm also talking to United Airlines, and United Airlines is telling me they're not going to do anything for me. They're basically saying, "Oh yeah, we can't do anything. What we can do for you is refund you your ticket. We don't have any other flights. We'll give you your money back." And I'm like, that doesn't really help me, because first of all, I still need to leave China. I don't have any accommodations at this point, and I need that money. I need the money that I paid for this ticket on my credit cards to get another flight. Well, there's nothing we can do. And I'm like, you won't even expedite the refund, will you? No, they wouldn't do that either. So I was in a sticky position, and that's when the agents they found a flight that was a little bit more expensive, but still very expensive. I was still paying like for 3 seats, but I could afford it, so I bought that ticket, and and then I had to figure out what I was going to do next. So I was calling that was going to be 1 week later. That was going to be on the following Sunday, leaving Xiamen to the United States. And I'd never left Xiamen before, but Xiamen was close to where I had been living in Fujian. So I decided I would go back to where I had been working, because by all means they were still liable for me. Until I leave China, I'm still basically their their agent. I'm still working for them I'm still under their liabilities on the contract, even though I had vacated the apartment. And I talked to them, and originally they said, okay, yeah, you can come back to your apartment for a week and stay there. I said, great, that's not really a big deal. I know my apartment's pretty well equipped, and it won't be too much of a hassle or too much of an inconvenience for me to wait another week. So I get all that done, and I go about I'm going to have to get another flight back to Quanzhou at that point, and figure out what I'm going to do when I get from Quanzhou back to my apartment. Now, flying to Shanghai, I had gone through all the security. I had paid for excess baggage. Just getting to Shanghai, so there was considerable expenses associated with that. Now I knew I'd be paying those expenses again just to get back to Quanzhou. So I had to go and pursue all that. I was able to get a flight later in the evening, and I was expected to arrive back in Quanzhou maybe 8 or 9 o'clock at night the same day. Now, I originally thought I had to go to another terminal for the domestic flight, and in the process of doing that, the security between the terminals is actually, you have to go through a complete other security check. So the situation was that I had my guitar case with me, and what I usually do is I use that as checked baggage, but at the airport you can get your luggage bubble wrapped and sort of plastic wrapped, and there's usually not a problem checking it after that point, but you have to kind of do it once you get inside the airport. And I had done that, and that was kind of a considerable expense also. It was about 150 kwai, 50, $60 to do that. But I had to go from one terminal to the other one, and just doing that, the security at the other terminal, they decided that they wanted to look into my guitar bag. And so they had to cut off all that wrapping and all that bubble wrap and take a look at something, which they later said it was okay, even after having that same item been inspected in the other terminal when I went there to leave on my original flight. So I lost that money there, and then it turned out I had to go back to the same terminal I'd just been from. So I went back to that terminal, and that security check tried to give me a hassle about it again. And I was just like, they just checked this at the other terminal. All I did was walk from this terminal back to the other one. But it was quite frustrating, and it was just more money I was losing. But I was in the right terminal now for my departing flight back to Quanzhou, and all I had to do was wait. So I decided to talk to that American woman. I saw her sitting over there, and I said I couldn't help but see that you were kind of experiencing probably a similar circumstance as me. How are you doing? And she kind of explained that her situation was the same. She had a lot more luggage. She had a cat. But I'm always kind of suspect of these kinds of situations where you run into somebody who is is in the same boat as you are, or is very familiar with the circumstances you're in at that time. Because it's happened to me a number of times, dealing like with the American Embassy and things like that. And I had contacted the American Embassy and everything, and they kind of knew where my travel plans were at that point. I'm always kind of suspect of that kind of situation. But I figure if I can offer any assistance or comfort or any ideas to this person who might need them also just as much as I might need them, that I would do so. Just out of an act of courtesy and just kind of act of goodwill, I guess. So I went over there, talked to her, see what was going on with her. She seemed to, from what she told me, United Airlines was able to book her another flight because United Airlines was going to commence flights, or they had told her they were going to commence regular flights on June 5th, which I later turned out to be that wasn't going to happen. But I was already out of China by that point. But, so I don't know what happened to her. But we got to talking. And she seemed to be okay staying in Shanghai until June 5th and taking her flight out. I told her what my arrangements were, and we kind of wished each other good luck. A weird thing happened was this Chinese vagrant. I don't know how he got into the international airport there, but this guy was an old, very sort of disheveled, dirty looking guy. He kind of comes up to both of us. He sees our guitar cases. And he's like, play us a song. And I'm like, no, absolutely not. I'm going through in this situation where I have no accommodations. I'm trying to get a flat. I have no time for that kind of silliness, that kind of nonsense. But she's kind of, this woman is kind of flaky about it, to be honest with you. She's like, yeah, get your guitar out and play. And I'm like, are you crazy? Are you absolutely out of your mind? This is not. So I'm getting a bit bad vibe that she's kind of one of those flaky liberals that think that the world's going to be healed with a song. And that all your troubles can go away with a song, one of those flaky liberals. And I'm just like, well, yeah, I'm gonna get going now. Yeah, I gotta go get my flight and stuff like that. So I go over to get kind of say goodbye and take her WeChat and say, yeah, let me know what's going on with you, and if there's any way I can help you, please don't hesitate to send me a message or something like that. But I have to pursue. I have arrangements set up, and I have a flight. I have to go catch those things. And so we say goodbye to her, and it was just getting my flight. And once again, flying back to Quanzhou, that required me paying excess baggage all over again. So here's another, and it's this is more of an expensive bill, is get this, lug this luggage around. I have quite a bit stuffed into these suitcases. They're heavy, they're large, and I had my bathroom sink I was carrying also. It's just a major hassle when you have all that luggage. And fly back to Quanzhou. That was a quick flight. It was only about 2 hours. Land there. It's maybe about 8 or 9 at night. First, before I say that, before I left for Quanzhou, before I left Shanghai back to Quanzhou, my employer called me back, and my landlord called me back and said, now they're telling me that I can't stay at the apartment. They said they rented it out, which is just absurd. It was 1 day since I had left, and it's just absurd to think that I had left, that they had rented it out when I left, and that soon, unless they had put grandma on there or something. But they but my employer was saying you can't stay there, but there's another foreign teacher here that you should message, and maybe you can stay with him. You know, like, mind you, they're just telling me maybe. And I'm like, no, you have to find out some place for me to stay. It's not a maybe situation anymore, you know? Because A, I'm only in the situation because you suggested I stay. And so they give me his WeChat, and I contact him. This is a new teacher that I'd never heard of before. They'd spoken a little bit a while, and to be honest with you, they're weighing him. They're using him as kind of leverage in our negotiations for the new contract. When I had, you know, we'd made a deal that was a great deal for me, and it was definitely going to give me an elevation in status and finances. And they were never happy with that, especially my employer's son. My employer had a younger son. He works for the government, the CCP, and he wasn't happy. I could tell from the outset that he thought I was going to get being paid too much money. Just in our conversations, there was definitely some sort of tone where I don't approve this. And I was like, it's really not up to you, dude. He didn't seem happy with it, and so I could see his incentive was to kind of undermine it. And he started giving me these hints after we had signed the contract that they had another American employer coming, a teacher coming. And I was like, that's just completely ridiculous because of all what's going on in the pandemic right now. Like, bringing somebody here, an American teacher agreeing to do it is absurd, you know, unless they're like too stupid to not know, you know, unless they're too stupid for words, or B, you're paying him more than you are paying me to come and do this job. But yeah, they talked about this guy, and it turns out he did come to the school. And I talked to him, and he said, yeah, you can stay. I have an extra room. You can stay there. All right, great. So now I have a place to stay at least for a week. And I fly back to Quanzhou. I get to Quanzhou, 2 hours. It's raining, and it's just kind of miserable. It's a small airport. Everybody's just kind of crowded together. You know, at this point in China, nobody is really, you know, wearing masks, or, you know, there's very few people sort of following the pandemic guidelines. And I'm wearing my mask, but there's very, very few other people doing it. Also, I'm a foreigner, so I have to go through different sort of checks and different sort of entry to every city I go to. I have to go through all that, and that's just more and more hassle. I get out to the taxi queue. It's just wandering around the building. It's raining out, starts pouring out. People are just smoking cigarettes. Nobody's got masks on, and they're trying to fit as many people into a cab as they can. I have all this luggage. I'm the only one lugging it around, and it's just, you know, it's just pretty awful. And it's late at night too, you know. And so I give them the apartment complex. I was under the impression it was my old apartment complex. That's what this teacher was telling me. He's, I'm at your school. I'm in the. He presumed it was the same one that I was in, and I presumed it was the same one that I had left. So I get the taxi back all the way back there, and it's a pretty long drive, you know, it's pretty far outside of town. Pay the taxi driver, say thank you, he leaves. I go into the apartment. I go to the building and the apartment number that this foreign teacher had given me, and, you know, I go up the hotel, and it's just completely under construction. There's, you know, it's not habitated, you know. And so at that point I realized this is not the right apartment complex we're talking about. It. He must be down by the primary school or something like that. So I give him a message, and he's like, yeah, no, I'm down by the primary school. And I'm like, you know, because it's pretty far. It's like a good 3-4 kilometers, good 15 minutes walk without luggage, and there's no way I'm going to do this at 11 o'clock at night with all the luggage that I'm carrying. So I have to try and get a taxi from there to here, from that apartment complex to the other complex. And luckily DD was still running at that point. Usually at, like, you know, past 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, it gets harder and harder where I'm located out there in the countryside to get a taxi to come out there. But fortunately I was able to get one. The taxi came and got me, and he drove me down to the apartment. And I was pretty grateful for that because I know it was kind of like a very cheap fare, so I doubled it and gave him twice just for that quick ride, because I know he kind of, most taxi drivers would be like, nah, I don't want to go out there for 7 quad or 8 quad, it's not worth it to me. So I doubled it and made it worth his while, hopefully. And then I met this new American teacher who was there. It was the first time I ever saw him. I'd never, I'd heard his name, and I didn't really kind of believe he was there. It just seemed like they were trying to strong arm me after our contract negotiations. But there he was, and he was he was a nice guy, very friendly, and he took me out of his apartment, and he had an extra room. The extra room was like, there was a bed, one of those hard mattresses that you have in China that don't have any give to them whatsoever. It's just like basically 2 boards, and no sheets or anything, just a couple pillows, and it was basically like a cat room. I guess he had cats, and this was a room he usually kind of used for the cats, because there was like, cat litter and stuff around there. But I guess the cats were gone now. His girlfriend had the cats or something like that. And so I just kind of crashed. I got there, put my stuff in, and said, I'm pretty tired, I'm just going to crash. That's okay with you. And then the next week I spent getting to know him, and just kind of trying to figure out how I could leave the least footprint in that week that I could, certainly in terms of expenses, And it was just very awkward, because here I was back where I had just left, and not only was I, back, but I was I was down by the primary school, so, like you're seeing faces that you knew from there that are like, what are you doing here? Still, well, I thought you left, kind of stuff. Very awkward. And it was also kind of awkward too, because I kind of looked into this teacher a little bit and found out he was like one of the democratic socialists in the United States, and I was like, he was part of that party, and he was, it seemed like he was maybe a little bit very sort of, and just in the conversations I had with him, I could tell he was like a pro-China guy, and believed in their system or whatever, believed politically aligned. He was more politically aligned in his way of sort of like ignoring the negative aspects of China and not talking about them, even when we talked about things that were just like what was going on in terms of this contract, in terms of what the teachers and how the school was operating. But we did have some agreement on certain issues, and he was a nice enough guy. We kind of bonded over the Michael Jordan Last Dance documentary. We both kind of sat down and watched that a couple of days. But for the most part, we just kind of did my own thing, and just didn't want to really make too much of an impact, or I didn't want to get too unraveled at that point. I wanted to keep everything in my suitcases. The apartment itself where he was living, they just sell you so many lies too, like that's their way of dealing with something, because they don't want to deal. But he constantly told me this thing like, oh yeah, I'm leaving. They gave me the same message, and so I found a job in Xiamen, and I'll be leaving next week too, and he was like, I'm leaving Wednesday, or I'm going out Wednesday. And then I was like, well, I'm going to leave Friday. Well, then I'm going to leave Friday too. And he just kind of always was adjusting his story to my story. But you could tell they were just kind of stringing it along, that they had basically brought him in there to undermine my job and pay him. I'm going to assume they're paying him less, because if they're paying him more, they're pretty stupid, unless they just feel he's a better political puppet, or something like that to educate their kids or something like that. I mean, one thing about the job is that they never really wanted me to have that much of a footprint, There's 2 ways of looking at that. Like, I didn't do a lot of hours there, and one way is like they're being generous, and the other way is like they don't want me to have that much of a footprint, leave much of a footprint on their kids. They want to bring somebody else in here who's more inclined to be politically aligned with them. because there are certain aspects like, yeah, I'm not going to be waving Chinese flags around or something like that, you know. I'm not going to be doing that, you know. So maybe that was so maybe that was another reason for them bringing him in there and paying him more to be more integrated. But and this is something about Chinese bloggers, especially the ones who have wives. You know, they're the biggest joke of them all. But I'll do another video about that because they're integrated. So anyway, his apartment was, and this is so true of liberals, you know, like I've met a lot of like American liberals, you know, and they're slobs. I'm gonna be honest with you. Their apartment, they're just, the American liberal males tend to be slobs, you know, unless, you know, and it was so true of this guy's apartment. You know, he was a very smart guy. He knew all about basketball and all the stats and everything like that. But his apartment was filthy. You could tell he hadn't cleaned it, you know, probably since he had arrived. And I was like, nah, you're not very good at taking care of yourself. But I don't want to be too critical of him because he did me a pretty kind favor that he shouldn't have been. Well, he should have been obligated to do it for me, no matter what, to be honest with you. So anyway, I stayed there, and in the course of our conversations, we talked a little bit about Xiamen. This is where I'd be leaving. My new flight was leaving from. And he told me, you know, a car to Xiamen is relatively expensive, and it's probably going to be a lot easier because prior to that, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to take a train to Xiamen now, get in a hotel there, stay, and then get my flight. And the trains were really cheap. The trains were like, you know, 15, 20 kwai. It was a very short trip. But the hassle of getting all that luggage through another security and all the checks and all that just to get on the train was not something I was too keen to do. And so when he suggested getting a car to Xiamen, I was like, yeah, I can just throw my stuff in the car. Boom, we're out there. It's a 2-hour drive. It's maybe 200, 300 kwai. I'll do that. So I agree. So that was a great idea, and I appreciate that suggestion. And I booked my flight is going to leave on Sunday. I book a hotel for Friday and Saturday night, and at that point, no problems. You know, everything's set up. Friday comes along, Friday morning, say goodbye, thank you, and go out. My car's waiting. You know, one of the great things about DD, you can book cars and reserve them, and usually they're pretty reliable. Boom, I'm in the car, I'm out to Xiamen, I get to my hotel. It's a home inn. It's one of the nicer, it's not, you know, your typical franchise home inn. Home inn is one of the main Chinese franchises in China. But you have different kind of boutique home inns here and there, and I kind of found a boutique one that seemed like a good deal with, you know, breakfast and things included, not far from the airport. Great. I've never been to Xiamen, so this is all kind of a new city to me. I'm quite surprised there's an international airport there, to be honest with you, and I'm sort of curious about that. You know, having been in all the big airports in China, I never really sort of enjoy that experience because they're so mammoth that you're like walking forever just to get to your gates, and I don't really like that experience in Chinese airports, so I don't like to really travel that frequently through them. But I'm told about but I'm going to the Xiamen airport for the first time. So anyway, I get out to the airport. They drive me out there. Now the hotel is located like halfway down a street, so there's no place really for this taxi to drop me off. So he drops me off at the nearest corner, which requires, yes, once again, I'm carting all this luggage down a roadway. You know, I'm not too happy about that. I get to the hotel door, I go up the elevator, go to the reception desk, and they're like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, I'm from America. I've been staying in China for the last 2 years, you know. Oh, you can't stay here. You know, like, what? No, you can't stay here. We can't have foreigners staying in our apartment because of the COVID. Okay, where do I go then? Where can I stay? Hold on, we'll see if we can, you know, and they get on their phone trying to find places and like that. And meanwhile, I just get on my phone, find a hotel near the airport, and I book it. Boom, I'm going there. Thank you. All right, bye-bye. I book another DD cab. They take me to this new hotel. I go to the check-in. This new hotel is kind of shoddy. It's an older hotel. It's a Chinese hotel, kind of a independently run one. It's not part of any chain or anything like that. Bashan Hotel, I'll do a review of them later. But it had breakfast, and it was, you know, right down the street from the airport. And so those are two things I'm looking for at this point. It's still early in the day. It's still only like 1 o'clock at this point. Get to the hotel. I go through check-in without a problem. You know, we do the health code thing, and you know, I pay all my deposits, so on and so forth. I pay for 2 nights. Go up to my room, shower up. It's, you know, it's kind of run down hotel. It's not. It's definitely a downgrade from the hotel I intended to stay in. One of those older Chinese hotels. It looks a little rough. Looks like it could use some work. And that whole area is kind of under a lot of construction, and so it's just all very messy and dirty. And my check-in, though, I could care less. You know, I'm just looking to get my flight out of there at this point. And I'm just grateful that they checked me in. So I book in, I get settled in a little bit. I decide to go out to the airport, check it out for the first time. It's right down the road. I take a taxi out there, boom, check it out, walk around. It's great. You know, the Xiamen International Airport is very small. I'm like, this is awesome. I can go from here to here really quickly. And so I was pretty happy about that, you know, because I don't like those big airports. And so I go back to the hotel, and then I just kind of settle. I grab some, I go down to dinner. There's like a kind of a hotel or a restaurant outside the hotel. It looks like you don't get a lot of customers, but I order enough food for the next 2 nights, and just take it back to my apartment for the next night. And that's it. I'm settled in for the evening. Just start watching some TV. It's about 11 o'clock at night, and then I get a call from reception desk, and suddenly the reception desk is telling me I can't stay there, that I have to leave because they can't have foreigners. And I'm like, well, I've been here all day, you know, I've checked in, and, you know, I paid for 2 nights, and I'd like my money back. You can't stay here. So, all right, fine, you know, and I go looking for another hotel, and I found the Holiday Inn Express, and I call them. I actually speak to a manager there, and they say, yeah, you can stay here, just, you know, and it's actually nicer, it's cheaper, it's got a nicer breakfast. So I was like, awesome, you know, this is gonna actually upgrade myself. So I go down to the hotel, and the reception desk, and I said, can I get my money back? You know, I would like my money back. I'm going to check out. I found a room. And they're like, well, you found a room. And she's like totally ignoring the fact that I found a room, you know. And she's like, well, you can stay here, though. If you can't find a room, you can stay here. And I'm like, but I found a room, but you know what? I don't really want to go through this at night right now. It's pretty late. I don't really want to go through the whole process of getting in a car, a hotel, a taxi, and going to another hotel. So fine, we'll just stay here. If you're not going to give me a problem this next day, tomorrow, I have no problem staying here. So I do that, but I have a free breakfast, and the next morning I go down for the breakfast, and they're all, you know, you start sensing people are giving you the eye, like, what is he doing here? He's not supposed to be here, you know? And, you know, they're playing I'm noticing it's a very CCP, pro-CCP, nationalistic kind of hotel now, you know, like all on the TVs and stuff, they're playing the government channels. The breakfast was, you know, it was so-so, but it was better than nothing, you know. I'm not going to complain. It was good on that scale. And I go out for a walk, and, you know, like I said, it's just it's just factories and everything around the airport, and little dirty alleyways. And I was like, nah, I'm going to go back to my apartment and watch movies or something. So I go back to my apartment, and the next day I have a flight out at 10 o'clock, so I have a very early taxi booked, 5:30 in the morning, and you know, I check out. And here's the curious thing is that when I checked out at you know, like 5:30 in the morning, or 5 o'clock in the morning, because I want to be at the reception desk at 5:30, and luckily I got all my stuff out of my room, and I just wanted to go back in and take a walk around and see if I left anything under the beds or anything like that. And when I closed the door, they changed the lock, apparently, because my key card wouldn't work. So while I was asleep, they changed the lock, knowing that I was in there, and basically sending you the message that you're not supposed to be here, and if you leave, you know. So I was like, well, luckily I can just walk out of here at this point. So I go down to the reception, they give me my deposit back, I check out, bye-bye. I get my taxi to the airport, check in there, just kind of waiting. Another hippie guy, another hippie American, you know, is there, and I'm like, I don't really want another hippie right at this point, you know. And talk a little bit to him, but like, you know, whenever we can part ways, I'm like cool with that. And so I get to the airport, and we go up to the international flight. Is this, you know, there's this one section of the airports that's just for international flights, and that's all closed down. You know, it's just very minimal services there. They just open it up when there's a flight, and then close it right back down, I guess. And I get there, and it's one of those sort of on the tarmac kind of flights where you're bussed out to the tarmac, and you gotta, you know, walk up the stairs into the plane, board on. At that point, I realized I basically had paid for 3 seats. You know, my price of my ticket was basically the 3 seats, which, you know, I mean, like, that's great, but I wanted business class. You know, I want business class if I'm going to be paying business class prices. But that being said, the Xiamen Airlines is much better as an international flight. I was pretty happy with the flight. You know, it was nice. It was comfortable. The services were great. The flight was actually cleaner. You know, like, I've done a lot of domestic flights in China with Xiamen, and I never was very impressed with it because I think they didn't even serve you beverages. They charged me 5 kwai for a Coke, or, you know, it was just absurd. But this one was actually quite nice, and I can't complain about this flight other than the price that I was being overcharged for it. And but they served a really great meal, really good stuff. There was like a pork bun, and there was a very nice dinner. They didn't serve any. You couldn't get any beverages. They just gave you water with your meal. But you know, like, there's no sodas or juices or coffees or beers or anything like that. Just water. So that was kind of a downturn, kind of a detractor, but overall I liked their international flight of Xiamen flights much better than my experiences on their domestic flights. And that flight was very uncomfortable because of all the stuff I was wearing my masks and my respirator. I chose to use my more sort of industrial respirator because it was more comfortable, and it was just so uncomfortable being in all that stuff for 12 hours. Most of the people on the flight were respecting sort of masks and stuff like that, so that was good. The stewardess went by and checked our temperatures periodically during the flight, maybe 2 or 3 times in 12 hours. And they would give you plastic gloves. If you wanted to go to the bathroom, you had to use plastic gloves, and then you had to throw the plastic gloves out after the bathroom. You know, so after you use the bathroom. So basically, then they would give you like a handy wipe. So, like, basically, it wasn't wash your hands in the sink. It was like use plastic gloves, throw the plastic gloves out, and then handy wipe, sterilize with a handy wipe. That was kind of weird. And then I arrived in California. I got to LAX. Now I departed Xiamen, China. I left China at 7 a.m. in the morning, and I arrived in Los Angeles, LAX, at 10 a.m. that same morning. So basically, that Sunday was now 48 hours for me. And because it wasn't a direct, I couldn't get a flight all the way back to Jacksonville. I had to explore ways of getting back to Jacksonville. And what I found was the cheapest way to do it was to drive a rental car. And because the situation with flights, flights were, you know, $200, $300 themselves, but then with all my baggage, because domestic flights in the United States, they, you know, check baggage is all charged these days. There's nothing free about it. With all my luggage, it would have been a good $600 bill, or a good grand almost, you know, just to get from LAX to Jacksonville, you know. And I was trying to explore ways of making that less expensive, you know, because I had spent so much on just getting back to the United States. And I checked out the train. The train was like a week-long trip that would have took me up to Chicago, and then back down to Florida. And I was like, I don't want to do that, you know. It's not with luggage, you know, with different sort of transitions, portages here and there, and I was like, I don't want to do that. And the flights, it was just too costly, and I looked at the car and I thought that's the best way to do it. It's much less expensive, unlimited miles. I can pull it off, and I can drive right to my house. So I don't have to worry about get contact with my parents or anything like that. Or contact with anyone so much. I can drive right to my house. Boom. So I look at the cost of that, and it's definitely the way to go. So I got off at LAX. I had my car reserved and went right to the car rentals, got my car. Now another problem arises that I didn't have international service on any of my phones at that point. So all my Google Maps are off, all my Wi-Fi is off. So what I have to do is I have to find like a McDonald's or something and get a map, and get on my Wi-Fi and find a map, which is what I did. And I had originally asked for a GPS service, a GPS device with my car, but they didn't give it to me, or they forgot to give it to me. So I didn't have any maps or anything like that. I was familiar with I-10, but I didn't know how to get to I-10, So, like I said, I was like driving around LAX, finding a McDonald's or a Burger King, finding a place that has a free Wi-Fi, and then go on the internet and get your map. So I did that. And then I was on the road, for the next 48 hours. I drove from LAX all the way back to my home, and it took me a day and a half. And it was actually a good drive. I actually liked doing it. It was kind of a different. I've been across the United States numerous times at this point in my life, and I was always kind of amazed that it only took like a day and a half to do it by car if you just kind of drove straight through. And that's what I did. I didn't want to stop. I just kind of regulated myself to every 2 hours, every 2.5 hours, I would stop and gas up. I didn't want to drive on an empty tank at any point. I didn't know what it was going to cost me. So every 2.5 hours I would drive and fill up, and that kept my costs down considerably. I was only filling the tank up with $6 to $12 a pop, and I just drove without resting, just stopping for food, and kept that all minimalized, kept track of it all. I think my overall cost was something like, altogether with the rental, was only like $450 to make that trip driving from Los Angeles to my home here in Florida. And it was a better drive, I just wanted to kind of refamiliarize myself with the American, a lot of the American sort of landscapes, And I always liked driving through the desert. Texas is just a big state, so most of that drive there was down along the southern coast. Most of it was Texas, and I got back home, and then I just kind of crashed in my bed once I could. And the big panic of it for me, though, was I had rented the car for, I think, 3 days, and I wanted to be able to get that extra day refunded to me. So I really only had like a couple of hours to sleep even after that drive. So I put my head down and dozed off, and the next thing I know, I'm jumping out of bed to bring the car back. My father actually came to my house, woke me up, and I had to, I was like, I gotta get the car back, the first thing I wanted to do without really thinking too much. But anyway, I'm back in the United States. I've spent the last week so getting the house back up and running. Things like hot water, the hot water heater needed to be replaced. You have to get unfortunately a lot of the gas and the water, my parents had turned that on prior to my arrival, and a lot of it's just kind of getting the yards straightened out, and then all this stuff with this George Floyd is going through to kind of distract from the Chinese issues, of course, deflect it. And I'll talk a little bit more about like how China's using Africa, and like South Africa also. They see how they can sort of, like South Africa. I'll just kind of suggest what that video is going to be about. But politically, they see how South Africans, their government down there, needs help with the whites, basically dealing with the whites. So China's kind of inserting themselves like, well, we can use those whites, and we can, as long as you kind of stay on our side in America, you know. So so like they're kind of exploiting the black and white sort of dynamic, even in most colonies, in most former British colonies, they're exploiting that sort of racial sort of sentiment. And I definitely reflected, and I'll talk a little bit more about how China's sort of exploiting South Africa at this point, and the racial sort of dynamic that exists there, and in the United States also. But that's all for now. Like I said, I'm back in the United States. I'll probably continue doing these videos. I know people tried to shut me down also because they want to, you know, pat their boys on their back, their guys. But like I said, I'm not monetized, so I can. There's nobody patting me on the back but me. All right, guys. Thanks for watching. If you want to click like and subscribe, I definitely would appreciate that. And stay tuned for more programming. This is the Dollar Store Dynasty. Take it easy. Fly casual.
There's miles and miles of flannel on the floor and up the stairs. And father says it's rotten getting mixed up with the cotton and sitting.